why we want to tell our own story on how we can leverage technology for energy security and sustainable growth in Africa. We want to chart that path by navigating geopolitical shifts and market dynamics. Would you please help me welcome my friends up here as they wade through these turbulent waters? Dr. Ainoje Alexander Irune, please, a round of applause.
Thank you very much, Mr. Keynote Speaker. I think you made our lives easier. You literally set the tone for this session. Amazing people and leaders in their various fields, and we'll be looking at how we can leverage technology for energy security and sustainable growth in Africa. I'm sure from morning up until now, we've heard a lot about Africa technology, energy, and now we want to talk about how are we going to do this. So I'll start by asking the first question on this, which is essentially, how can Africa leverage digital technologies to improve energy grid reliability and reduce energy losses? I think we've heard a lot today, and I'm pretty sure that my panelists seated here will be able to do justice to this. So I would start with Dr. Aina in no particular order. Ainoji, yes, please.
Testing. Yep. We found one eventually. Yeah, technology, right? Good afternoon, everyone. It's always a pleasure to be here. I think when we look at the landscape of technology and the question that has just been posed to most of us on the panel, I think there's an initial question before this. And that, for me, is, what is technology doing to the requirements for energy in the future? And I think that for us is a more fundamental question. When you think about that question and you think about the advent of the singular most revolutionary impact on humanity, which is the artificial intelligence race we see at the moment, we know for a fact that a lot of that computational power has to be available for our future. So when you look at that and you see the 4-fold to 6-fold increase over the next 3 to 4 decades from a power standpoint, we know that the world is certainly going to be consuming in excess of 100 million plus barrels. And I think that's a fundamental point for all of us to understand at the core. And when you leverage everything we have today, Africa remains the security, at least across the central hemisphere, the security for future power production or energy production across the world. So when we talk about Africa's energy security, in the light of the technological advancements that have happened over the last decade and that are going on now, there is a lens that needs to also point into the future, understanding that we're also the world's security, to ensure that if indeed we're going to do this in a net zero way, I think one of the keynote speakers spoke about the concentration of sunlight alone on the continent. If we're going to do this in the future, Africa is going to be important to that future. So dare I say, a future that requires us to be realized. So what are we going to do for ourselves in that context of that future? And I think this is where the second question becomes very important. We're at an inflection point. If we don't read the room, understand no one is coming to save us, and do what we must, we will be left behind. And this time, we will be left behind in ways that I worry if, we'll be able to catch up in another century. We know today that across the energy value chain, technology plays a significant role in optimization, improving project delivery, measurement and containment, your ability to remotely monitor things. All of these are all great, but I think the first step is really how we create the frameworks, the infrastructure, the funding, everything we've spoken about all through today, to get to that point where we can talk about intelligent grids. I love the point you made, the keynote speaker, about creating some intelligent systems around our distribution networks. I speak about Nigeria specifically. Our distribution network is so archaic that for you to do anything of that nature, you really have to scrap it and start all over again. So when you look across the entire value chain, you're looking at what are the new projects that are not as expansive. We focus on captive power. How do we then embed technology to improve the efficiency of captive power? Whether it's the monitoring and load balancing technologies that exist, how do you bring them to the fore? But to this question, I just really want us to sit with the construct that there is no future when it comes to energy provision without Africa. And if we allow that future emerge without what we need to do, whether it's from a skill perspective, investment perspective, or indeed a technology implementation perspective, then we will certainly have missed the boat. So I'll stop there. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you want to support?
So I'll speak more from, I guess, personal experience of managing renewable energy and energy access projects. So a lot of the technologies that I've come across, which, they're building momentum towards rolling out on a larger scale, but are already in use. So starting with AI, like you mentioned. So last year at London Climate Week in 2024, I was in a room with Sir Andrew Stair of the Bezos Earth Fund. And they announced that the fund was launching a $100 million AI, I think, nature challenge, basically to fund anyone who can create the best AI-based solutions for power sector optimization. And in our business, you know that the innovation is where the money is. If you see where the funders are going, you know that's where the market is going. So clearly they are betting big on AI. And it's also being used because, they're using AI to predict consumptive patterns, even for formatting weather. And in Kenya, M-Copper is using AI to estimate creditworthiness. And that's how they tailor repayment plans for solar home loans. And so that's how it's being used currently. Also in raising financing, which is our greatest problem in the energy sector. There's a blockchain platform called Sun Exchange, and using that, global investors actually crowdfund for solar solutions or solar projects through cryptocurrency platforms. And it's currently doing it right now, mostly in East Africa. I think that's more where our Silicon Valley exists. They're way ahead of us than here in West Africa. But if we come back down to West Africa, say in Ghana here, if you have an ECG app, when you pay your bills through the ECG app, you will notice that there's a part where you're able to pay small, and I think that's the acronym, basically, of the moniker. And with that, you can use your mobile money to pay your ECG bills intermittently and using the app. And so that's the way that digital payment systems is making, operationalizing efficiency, but also helping young unbanked Ghanaians to be able to balance their needs. If you can pay your bills little by little, then that helps to circumvent the commercial losses that come from, that ECG is suffering, as we all know. And so, but then as all these solutions can't work if we are not developing local capacity simultaneously, because we risk, importing all the solutions, which we have been doing, that we can't use. So you make sure, which is why I really like how ECG has rolled theirs out. It's been a very gradual process that they've taken Ghanaians step by step. AI, obviously, it's far more technical than what we're doing right now, but we are seeing some organizations that are working their way towards it. So as we're coming up with this new solution, this new technological solutions, we need to make sure that we're building local capacity right alongside it.
Thank you very much. I think that was very well articulated. I heard you mention things around AI. I was doing some research myself, and I realized that we have cases where people are using AI for predictive maintenance rather than being reactive, which is what we've been, especially in West Africa, So we wait for the national grid to collapse and then we start chasing after looking for. But we have cases where people are actually being more proactive, setting up sensors at vantage points and using that to predict so that you prevent that from happening. So I think we're already doing stuff based on the comments that I've heard so far. It's just that I think, as Nana said, we need to talk more about these things because I think that has been one of our greatest problems. So thank you very much for that perspective. So I'll go on to my next question, and that's coming to you, Kevin. So based on the conversation we've had, what do you think are the most promising renewable energy technologies for Africa? And I'm asking about this because we already have something, we already have systems. How do we integrate this renewable energy? Because I mean, there's a lot of it out there, but we need to think about, we are not breaking down what is existing. It's a case of integration. So from your perspective, how can we integrate renewable with what's already there?
Thank you, Nidra. I think the first question to probably look at is what drives the choice of renewable energy as an investment. And I think what typically drives it is geography and I guess the resource. And I think in recent times, we've had new energy options around hydrogen, blue hydrogen, green hydrogen, all of the other interesting things that there's a lot of ongoing research. But I find that if you look at Africa, if you look at the diverse geographical spread, if you look at the natural resources, and if you look at the growing demand for energy, then you almost narrow it to solar, you narrow it to wind, you look at hydrogen, and then you look at biofuels. And I think over the years, there's been lots and lots of development technology around creating more access to solar or all the other energy sources and making sure that it's easily accessible. I think the way you think about integration is essentially looking at how do you get energy from these sources into the system. And I think in some scenarios, you would look at some sort of wide-scale grid options, or you start to look at small-scale or off-grid sort of solutions where in off-grid scenarios, you're able to sort of penetrate the rural communities, create energy access, leverage on that to make sure that you have some of the app technologies that have already been discussed where consumers have access to off-grid solutions. And then I think when you look at open grid or you look at large-scale grid solutions, then you're now looking at sort of urban development and looking at industry as energy access. I think integration is quite interesting because you don't want to scrap the existing energy entirely and say that, okay, today we're done, we're moving everything out of the system. I think it's really a gradual process. So you sort of look at how do you integrate renewable energy options with the existing traditional energy, and then gradually sort of phase it out. Because I think when you have adaptability, then it becomes very easy to sort of move on to, I guess, maybe more of renewable energy. But basically, you have a basket of options to look at it from. And from that basket, you essentially start to look at that sort of integration. Once you deliver that, then you can now look at, okay, how does AI come into the mix and sort of create the preventative maintenance? How does it optimize consumer behavior? Where do you look at more power consumption or energy consumption? Where do you pursue? All of that would come in once you've been able to integrate. But looking at biofuels, I just want to share sort of a real experience in Ghana where we basically work with a local company, and all they do is to aggregate used cooking oil. And then at the end of every month, they would send a container of used cooking oil to us. We would in turn blend it with normal gas oil. But what that does is that it reduces the sulfur content and obviously you reduce emissions. The next level of this is to now introduce technology that allows the used cooking oil to be processed in country for fuel use, right? And then that can go into industry, it can go into some sort of motor vehicle use. But what's interesting with that is over the period, they've now introduced technology that allows them to figure out which customers' used cooking oil is ready to pick up. How do they transact over the app? How does the logistics piece of it pick up the oil and still send it out? So we're seeing, I think in our small way, you sort of start in some sort of sizable way, but it just starts to grow from there. So I think we do have, the renewable world has many, many options of renewable, but I think when you look at Africa and its peculiarities, for me, it's obviously, solar, wind, hydrogen, and biomass. Yeah.
Thank you very much for that. I think there was something you said that kind of merged with what I think Nana said at the time about, the peak demand, right? When you have peak demand, that may be a good time to introduce some of these solar systems. I don't know about you guys. I know for some time when I moved to my place at 7 p.m., the current just drops. I have ways of monitoring, and it was a constant problem. And it still is a problem. So you realize that because a lot more people are accessing and using air conditions and all of that, so you see it drops. And if you notice, if you're going to have a phase going off, for instance, at home, that's around the time it's going to happen. It wouldn't happen in the daytime because at that time you're having peak energy demand. So when you have this kind of systems, you can set them up in such a way that they plug in at that time to boost the generation of electricity or whatever it is at that point in time. So thank you for that point and giving us that example on the biofuels. So over to you, Andrew. My question to you is, having listened to this conversation, how can sustainable oil and gas technologies specifically, contribute to Africa's energy transition? I ask this because, once you mention oil and gas, fossil fuel, everybody goes up in arms because, environmental concerns and all of that. But you and I being in the industry, we know that there are ways that we could still contribute to this and still harness the oil. So could you just touch base on that a bit?
Sure, thank you, Indira. Like you said, there are many different solutions, many different technologies that can be deployed. Already, I think some have been mentioned in the earlier conversation where we're talking about how we can capture flare gas as an example in the upstream process. There's also ways that we can actually improve the efficiency of some of our machinery. We can reduce some of the emissions. But critically, I think when it comes to the oil and gas space, the conversations that were had right at the beginning of the conference around just transition is a very key one. We should not forget the fact that Africa has to solve its problems by itself. And Africa must leverage its technologies in order to do that. So, for example, the cooking oil example that we just mentioned, I love that because it just shows maybe at a very small scale initially how we're trying to solve those problems. I think that we can leverage technology more and more to do that. In the, particularly in the upstream space, the company I work for, Modec, is actually a specialist in wind turbines development. So what they do is we build subsea submersibles and TLPs. And what we do is we mount these wind turbines on them as a way of trying to obviously generate power, but in a clean way. So these are things that the oil and gas industry is trying to do. But I think in this whole conversation, there's a thread that we have to bring out around context. The African context is very unique. Our diversity is actually our strength. So I think that as we look about how to deal with technology and sustainability, we must also look at how we can try and standardize some of these things. Because actually, I think standardization helps for us to scale. So if we are finding a certain solution is working one place, maybe it is possible to extend that elsewhere. So, I think from the oil and gas perspective, like I said, there are technologies out there. I know that Modec is deploying these wind turbines offshore, and they're very, very successful in Asia. And it's easily something that we can bring here to Ghana. I'm aware that, for example, in Ghana, we are looking at some wind energy projects in the eastern side of the coast. We've tried and failed, and potentially the Modec solution could be a potential solution to bring that forward. So I think there's a lot that can be done. But like I said, I think it's important to contextualize it, to standardize it, and then we can scale.
Thank you very much, Andrew. I think it's very good to know that Modec is doing stuff like that. You want to add something to that? Absolutely, please do that.
Thanks for that, Andrew. I think one of the elements that we see coming to play now is the fact that a lot of the oil on the continent, or gas on the continent, we could do a lot by improving our, not just extraction quantities or percentages, but we can do a lot by clean extraction. So one of the things that, just to piggyback on some of the work you're doing on the wind side, is when you look at the subsurface across the continent, for the major oil producers, it's well known, and there's a lot of data that governs a lot of those basins. We know that at the beginning of any discovery or project, the steps you take ahead of commissioning that project are extremely important. Now, why do I say this? That's a huge cost that we're burdened with. And with the advent of AI now, you can take a lot of that data, and just the way you build large language models, you can build oil and gas models, right? That effectively, AI loves anything with structure, right? And one of the things in the oil and gas space we have is a lot of structure and things done a particular way every time. So you can build a lot of these large language models or CNNs that can take this oil and gas information and effectively accelerate your time from exploration to find and even project development, right? If we look at all our, regulators who hold the, all the information of every well drilled in every basin, and we're able to come together to aggregate this data, I think Africa becomes a very cheap basin to then explore on multiple levels, right? Before we then get to the delivery of more effective drilling, more effective workover work, and all the other things that you need to bring this oil to the surface. But just wanted to add that and the impact AI could bring to really shortening that timeline and effectively taking out the early stage cost that is often a bottleneck for us. Thank you.
No, thank you so much. Okay.
I think this is a hot button topic, but I do like to sprinkle a personal experience here and there. And my thing with this is, so I know as a clean energy expert, and I've managed renewable energy projects for about almost a decade, oil and gas is supposed to be a dirty word, yeah? But actually, I have a qualification in oil and gas law, and I worked as an oil and gas lawyer across Equatorial Guinea, South Sudan, South Africa for many years. Coincidentally, my old boss is here, Minister Gabriel Obiang Lima. I lived in Equatorial Guinea for 3 years, and I worked for the Ministry of Mines and Hydrocarbons there. And so I come with the unique perspective of being an oil and gas expert as well as a clean energy expert. So I'm able to bring that fossil fuel knowledge into the renewable space. I know how best to mitigate the issues that we're trying to solve, yeah? So for 5 years, I worked with USAID, managing a USAID power project across West Africa. And even though we were under a Biden administration, which was climate first, we're still able to work in oil and gas technologies as long as there was significant emissions reduced or gas flaring managed or carbon captured. So like in Senegal and Mauritania, I did some work where we would convert power plants to natural gas. And it was okay to use climate funding to do that because there was a climate aspect. Or in Senegal, there's a 120 megawatts Malikunda power plant in Senegal. And in that one, what we did was to construct combined cycle power plants. And, they use steam and gas to, power generation. And so it's 50% less cost, 50% less emissions. So like he said, there's absolutely no way we can kind of just go from no energy to clean energy. There's something in the middle. So we kind of have to make that more cleaner, more efficient on our way to long-term permanent renewables.
Well, thank you so much for that. And I particularly love this question and this particular perspective because this is my field. I'm also in the oil and gas industry. And I've seen autonomous drilling. We now have people drilling wells with little to nobody on the rig. This is reducing the whole footprint. So oil and gas is not going to go away immediately because we are finding more innovative ways to reduce our footprint. And I think that's the key so that we can harness the best of both worlds, both the renewables as well as fossil fuels. So I have one question for you, Dr. Tony. So having listened to all of this that we've said, you see, it all boils down to money, l'argent. So my question now to you will be, how can Africa attract investments in energy technology and innovation, right? Based on what we've discussed all this while.
I normally have a big voice, sometimes without a microphone, it works. But just before I come directly to your question, I would want to sort of reiterate a point that was made at the plenary earlier, that Africa should not feel shy about the use of its resources just because fossil fuel has become discredited in the minds of some people. I mean, given the amount of discovery that is occurring on the planet, on the continent, we cannot afford to feel shy by using our hydrocarbons. And again, there's no law in this world that is saying that stop using fossil fuel, hydrocarbons. It says transition. So move away from that. So it's a process. And I like the concept of just transition, and that should be so. In terms of attracting, resources to that, I believe that it depends on how you package yourself. Africa must begin to package itself as a region that is ready to attract credit, that is ready to attract funding for the energy transition, I'll call it. For example, governance is very important. Anyone who is willing to bring capital to a country would want to see how the country is governed, how corruption is treated in the country. We always say that investors are cowards. They take their monies where they are very sure that the money will work for them. So first of all, governance is very, very important. Again, aligned to governance is also the internal policies that we have. Our tax regime, our financing regime, and all that could be a source of attraction of capital. Again, we also need to look within ourselves. No one will solve our problems for us unless Africa realizes that most of the problems can be tackled and probably solved by itself. Going by individual ways is not going to help us. We're going to dissipate energies. So it is important that we come together with the singular purpose of addressing the energy challenge. This can be, Ghana is trying to establish, a petroleum hub where it's going to build refineries, it's going to build jetties, petrochemical industry, storage tanks, and all that. The question that I ask myself is, to what extent have we related this to our African compatriots? To what extent have you wooed capital from Nigeria, from Sierra Leone, from Djibouti, from South Africa? To what extent? And are we willing and ready to do that? AFTA has created a good platform for us. This African Continental Free Trade Area project has created a good sort of space for us to be able to trade amongst ourselves, to even, export or import, fuel or crude easily from one country to another without going through the cost that we used to go through. So I think it's important that we look into ourselves, take advantage of this, all these geographical groupings, political groupings that is either subcontinental or continental, and then also create governance that will attract credit from outside, that will attract investment from outside. And the partnership is the key. Partnership is the key. We cannot go it alone. Our tax system must be looked at. Local content is very important, but the way we carry local content, we must also revise. I was a very dynamic soldier of local content. I know a few years ago when I was younger, we were driving local content, which is a very selfish approach to looking at things. But yes, local content is important. But now, if Ghana is doing local content on its own, Nigeria is doing local content on its own, Sierra Leone is doing local content on its own. How do we partner? So these are, just off the top of my head, some of the things that we can do to attract investment in our country.
Thank you very much, Dr. Obin. I think you literally touched on almost most of the key points that I also, put down when I was researching into this topic. You talked about, essentially clear regulatory frameworks, policies. But I think the biggest amongst everything you've said is regional integration, right? And I think today that has been the message. It's been consistent throughout the different speakers and even the sessions. I noticed there's a whole talk of we need to integrate more. As you said, Africa is not, we are very unique. Everything about us is very unique. We need to stop looking outwards for rescue and actually begin to work from within. And for that to happen, we need to integrate. And I can imagine what we'll do because we have the resources, we have the people, we literally have everything, but we just need to have the will to work together and get this done. So I think you really touched on some key points, and I think I like that. So as I get to the point where I get the team to round up on the various points, I would like to ask you a question. So looking at the geopolitical uncertainty, within not just within Africa, but even within the world at large, how can Africa, ensure that this energy security we keep talking about, we can achieve it through technological advancements?
I think we need to be consistent. I think there's opportunities for us to develop the right technologies in some of our educational institutions. I think that there's ways in which government policies can encourage innovation and reward innovation. Definitely, like you mentioned, there's some benefits from regional integration that could also be used. But like we've been saying, Africa must find solutions for itself by any means necessary. And in finding those solutions, in ensuring that we are recognizing what it requires to get the necessary financing, governance systems, technology systems, by displaying all those things, I think we would then have the necessary support to be able to drive the changes that we want.
You want to go?
It takes a while. I think a lot has been said. For me, regional integration sticks out. I think getting to a point where we can collaborate even across territories, even across geographies. Because the real truth is also that, a lot of these energy investment projects tend to be, large sums of financing required. So I think you cannot underscore the fact that the right partnerships must be had, either between private entities, between countries, but we must be able to do some sort of cross-border alliances to be able to access the funding and be able to share the resources and opportunities. But I think a lot has been said around that integration, and I just want to underscore that.
Thank you very much. So final remarks from the panelists before I hand over to the moderator for the day.
So with final remarks, I'll say just to touch on that geopolitical uncertainty. As a former USAID contractor, I found out just how uncertain geopolitics was on January 21st, 2025. And it's kind of reshaped the entire big aid environment, so to speak. So the pillars of energy security, accessibility, affordability, availability, and environmental acceptability, I don't think there's a single country in Africa that can boast of all four, maybe one or two. And if you're not able to, as we say, regional integrate, it's not possible. So this is where the power pools come in. And I did a lot of work with West African Power Pool in trying to unify the regional electricity market. We managed to kind of operationalize the WAP ICC a little, but I don't know how far that's gone now since I stopped working there. But then it's the power pools, we start from there because they're the ones that are connected to all the utilities in the region. So if the Southern Africa power pools, the Central African ones, are all able to work within their regions and then cross over and work between themselves, then we can get that regional interconnection that we're talking about. Because it is not the easiest to have individual countries deal with each other. Because prior to unifying that regional electricity market, Cote d'Ivoire would only ever buy from Burkina Faso. We couldn't sell to Burkina Faso. But now, if they're doing it through WAP ICC, you put your goods on the open market and everybody names their price, right? So that makes it much easier and it's, fairer and all of that. And if you're now talking from the donor side of things, which is where I'm at now, as a donor, we are trying to redesign projects so that they are government-led. They are no longer donor-led. Prior to this, we'll draft a task order in Washington, D.C., come here and say we're investing $200 million in the country and we're paying consultants to basically implement that task order. But as we see now with Mission 300, because right now I'm managing Mission 300 for Sustainable Energy for All, yesterday we had a Ghana Energy Compact Review workshop. And what makes Mission 300 so unique is the fact that it's government-led. We're having the governments themselves opt into Mission 300, design their compacts, and then tell the funders, these are our issues, these are our solutions, and this is how much we need. These are the resources we need to effectively implement the compacts. So that is how we're hoping to shift that uncertainty to I guess, to be more certain or to have more security to make sure it's more government-led.
I do think that there is an element of reality that we'll have to come to. As a continent, Europe has shown that if one of their countries needs to build a liquefaction plant, they can do it in 8 months to a year. I think it's the size of your will, not the size of your dream. Right? When you look at a lot of the work that is ahead of us, it's clear that 3 things we must do right. One is utilize what we have to get what we want, which is ensure that as countries and as regions that are able to produce, whether it's oil and gas today, we do that. We do it efficiently and optimally. And we're able to monetize that to then, secondly, fund the future we desire. Now, that future certainly speaks to regional integration and a lot of the points that were made here today. But I think as a continent, we must start to see and read the room that everyone has their problems now, especially with the posture of the United States. Everyone has their security problems, whether it's energy, whether it's migration. And if we don't realize what we have, I think it's virtually impossible to get what we desire. So for me, it's less technical. I think it's a bit more of a, if we could be dreamers again, like our forefathers. I think the ES mentioned Kwame Nkrumah, when they thought about the Africa that they wanted to live in, or their children wanted to live in. It wasn't about what they needed to do. It was why it needed to be created. And I think we need to take a step back and reassess the why. Why do we need an energy future? Why do we need a sustainable energy future, and how do we get there? So those will be my remarks. Thank you.
So I think mine is an observation. I think that, as we share all of these great ideas, what's also important is that there are lots and lots of projects that people are undertaking, whether by private individuals, whether by the government, whether by donor agencies. And I think what would be helpful is for us to have some sort of a reference point where these stories will probably be, available for us to find out what's going on. Who can we work with? Who can we partner with? How far have people gone in the process? So that, people don't start or reinvent the wheel as we move along. I don't know if this sits with the Energy Commission, but I think I would just throw it out there as an observation and one for us to pick up.
Final words?
Yeah, Indira, if I may, thinking about the 3 I's, that really is the theme for this conference. The last one being implementation. I think we know we have the why now, and I think we have the how. So the question now is the what. And I think, like all the panel have said, there are many different options that we have as Africans to solve these problems. But the question is, do we, at what scale do we want to do that? Do we want to be government-led and let governments provide the necessary environment so that the private sector can follow and partner? Or do we want to let the private sector drive it and hopefully get the financial institutions to back those investments and those innovations in order to then drive the necessary transformation that will be bankable? So it looks like we don't have the answer, and it looks like we just have to keep trying all the options. And hopefully we'll get to a point where we'll be able to leverage the technology, get the energy security, and ensure that we have sustainable energy for Africa.
Thank you. Just before I hand over to you, let Dr. Tony Obin close us.
Yes, thank you. Next time when I'm born again, I'll sit on the platform because I didn't get to make any point. But that having been said, I think let's go back to the context, my concluding remarks, to the context of this whole discourse. We're talking about navigating political shift, market dynamics, and an important point, climate concerns. So these actually call for us to, first of all, avoid silo mentality. And we've all spoken about integration and all that. Silo solution will not help for Africa. And I think African problems can better be solved by Africans. And it may sound like a cliche, but I think when we put our minds together, we should be able to solve our African energy issues. The second point that I want to make is that we have so far not averted our mind seriously to solar energy, even though there's no gainsaying that Africa has the highest solar radiation in the world, and we only convert, I think, less than 1% or so. And I think that's a potential waiting to be tapped. And we should find a way of tapping solar energy. We speak about that. We are always scared about the initial capital outlay, but I think that is the way to go when it comes to renewables. And finally, I think technology is the name of the game now. It is the thing which time has come. And therefore, we need to adopt and create new technologies. We adapt existing one and create new technologies. Smart, great technologies that would help us conserve and actually manage the amount, be efficient in the use of energy. I think these are the three key points that I wanted to make as a concluding position. Yes, thank you.
One more time, help me appreciate our rich panel. And so humbly I ask that you please come together for a group photograph. Dr. Obin, if you'll be kind as to join them, so that we capture you all and tie the bow on this wonderful conversation, leveraging technology for energy security and sustainable growth in Africa, navigating geopolitical shifts,